welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our special guest author is Janet Morana. Recall Abortion is the title, published by St. Benedict Press. Welcome once again, Janet, to
Thank
EWTN.
you, Doug.
It's a little different to say the author.
I know.
Obviously, you've been with Priest for Life for years, as your book recalls, and on TV with Father Frank and the program Priest for Life, and of course even the Catholic View for Women now.
That's right. And of course, you know, the Catholic View for Women, while defending life, you know, is my full-time work. But the Catholic View for Women, for me, really stems from my reversion, you know, because I was away from my faith for so many years, misunderstood the teachings of the church.
You talk about it in the book too, right?
Yeah, and to me, enough of the women don't know their faith, and that's why they use contraception, and that's why there's all this like pick and choose kind of cafeteria Catholics out there.
Right, exactly.
And I felt we need to get the truths that I'm beginning to rediscover and learn, and really fall in love with having a relationship with Jesus and the church, and that's what the Catholic View is about, is to take the teachings and make them relevant to today's issues.
Right, and you were just on with your whole team there.
That's
with,
right.
Teresa
and Astrid.
Yeah, about a month ago.
Exactly.
And I remember when you came and actually had proposed the idea several years ago. It's
That's
like a lot of things in the church and EWTN, you know, it takes a while for these things to percolate.
Yeah, it was actually all the way back in 2005 is when I first met Teresa Tomeo on a Catholic cruise, actually, you know, radio cruise. And I told her my idea, and she said, oh, pitch it to Doug, you know, and I did, and it kind of sat for a while. And then I remember you told me a few years later, well, give me a new outline, Janet, freshen it up, and I did, and then you gave me the call and said, let's do it.
Well, as we all know, timing is everything when it comes to the kind of work we're involved in. Now, let's talk specifically about this book. I'm assuming this name has two meanings. You got recall abortion and recall abortion.
Exactly.
Okay, explain.
Well, first of all, the women who've had abortions, as you know, I co-founded the Silent No More Awareness Campaign, which is the largest.
And when was that? Back in
2000. Well, we developed the idea in 2002, and we had our first events in January of 2003. And of course, it's the largest international mobilization of women and men who stand up publicly after they've gone through healing and speak about their regret of abortion. And so therefore, even if they've gone through healing, they recall their abortion. They don't forget it. They know they destroyed that life of the child. And they, Doug, will remember the date that they had their abortion, the date the child should have been born, you know, what would have been their due date. So they recall it. And so therefore, the title is to say that, yes, they always recognize the fact that they were responsible for destroying the life of that child.
Is it good for somebody to recall that experience?
Well, I think so, because, you know, one of the things they do in a lot of these healing programs, especially like in Rachel's Vineyard, they get an opportunity to name the child, to give it dignity. You know, they get to have like write a letter to the child, almost apologizing for what they've done and asking forgiveness from their child. You know, because very often, you know, women who've had abortions, they will go to confession, and they'll want to keep confessing their sin. And sometimes I think the clergy have to realize they need some more healing. And that's what happens like on a Rachel's Vineyard retreat.
Well, have you been finding more and more that maybe out of those kind of confessional experience, priests are referring women?
Yes, they are.
Because where they might not have before?
Exactly, because they need that additional closure. You know, they know God has forgiven them, but they have to learn to forgive themselves. You know, and with the recall then, if they've gone through the healing, it's a healthy recall, Doug. It's a remembering their child. And so that's one meaning of the book.
Right, and the forward, Father Frank Pavone says, this book is not about ideology, religion, or politics. It is not written to win an argument or to make people feel guilty. Then what is the purpose of the book?
Well, the purpose of this book is to show the damage abortion is doing to women. Now, I acknowledge up front, it destroys the life of the child. But if you know, people cling to abortion, Doug, because they feel women need abortion, right? I mean, how many people out there will say, well, you know, I wouldn't have an abortion, but, you know, we still need to keep it out there because women need to have it. So what I do in this book is I present the case why, from a woman's perspective, it is never necessary to have an abortion because it's not medicine, it's bad for women. And so therefore, I build the case in the book to demand a government recall, like a product, of abortion. You know, because when you think about it, it's not medicine. And then people might say, oh, come on, Janet, do you really have a government recall of a medical procedure. Well, if you look in history, and I point this out in the book, there was times in our history where like bloodletting was considered good medical practice.
Lobotomies,
and then lobotomies, you know, like when we grew up 50s and 60s, people had lobotomies, you know. But then the psychiatric industry said, well, no, we can treat these mental illnesses in a better way.
One of the Kennedy children, I believe.
Exactly, you're right. You know, Rosemary Kennedy had a lobotomy, and you know, now they don't do them at all anymore. So that's the concept, that we can take a procedure that's damaging to women and say, let's get rid of it altogether.
Don't you think it's interesting sometimes it seems to be that we take what's happening in the last 20 or 25 or 30 years and think, well, it's always been like that.
Right.
When obviously it changed to be like that, it could change back or change in a different way.
That's right.
But we act like it's always been that way. Now you have, interesting in reading your book, because clearly from what people think is a traditional abortion, going in and having an abortion, you didn't have that.
No.
But yet you have another relationship to that we can talk about, but also you have a situation with one of your daughters, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, that happened after you were really involved in this whole movement, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, I was working full-time for Priest for Life and involved, and my daughter Kelly was away in Michigan at law school, and she actually only stayed in law school for a year and then came home, but it was during that time in Michigan, ironically, that she had an abortion and didn't tell me. She actually didn't tell me until about a year or two later. And she always knew, my daughters always knew, I have 3 daughters, that, you know, if anything happens, you can come to me, you know. And it hurt me so much to know that she did that, you know. But we went together through a healing program. Actually, we went to Dr. Nay's program up in Canada.
Okay, I know that name's mentioned here in the book too, right?
And we participated there in a healing program together.
Talking about his abortion medicine, like you were referencing. Right?
Exactly,
okay,
exactly. Right. You know, and actually it was with Kelly's permission that it is mentioned in the book, you know, because
that's very brave of her.
Yeah, I usually don't mention it.
And even for yourself, I mean, at one level, because people would go and say, well, that's pretty hypocritical of you. You're out there telling everybody you can't, but your daughter took advantage of it, but you want to stop my daughter from having that.
Well, you know what it is too, Doug? I know a lot of people that I talk to that come up to me in the pro-life movement when I'm speaking, and Kelly's not the only one of a parent, of a pro-lifer, so to speak, that made that mistake. And I think what happens is, it's not that they don't know the information, they're ashamed to disappoint their parent, you know, because they just don't want to disappoint us. So we have to keep repeating, you know, that positive message, no matter what happens, we're here for you.
Well, don't you think society uses that against people too, with this idea that somehow if you've fallen or made a mistake in your life or someone else in your family, then you can't speak up for the truth, which is not true at all.
No, it's not. And it's Kelly who's actually has encouraged me now to, you know, I always felt she should have her privacy, but she says, no, Mom, the time has come that I'm going to be silent no more too. And so she's told me, tell Father Frank, put it in his part of the book. So he did, he mentioned it.
Well, he mentions at the beginning what this book really is all about, is what really serves the authentic good of women. What does abortion do to those who undergo it? What kind of promises does it make, and does it deliver on those promises? Which I think we know it doesn't. And there's a famous quote here that I had heard before: no one wants an abortion as she wants an ice cream or a Porsche. She wants an abortion as an animal caught in a trap wants to gnaw off its leg. Right.
And that's from Frederica Matthews Green, feminist. And it's true. You know, I know from working with the women of the Silent No More Awareness campaign, they don't go into an abortion clinic clenching their fists, getting their freedom of choice. They go there because they feel they have no other choice. Many times they feel trapped, abandoned, you know, things like that. They have no hope. What we need to do is to give them hope, and they will not choose abortion.
And also because it's kind of that the perception that it goes away.
That's right. Well, of course.
Get rid of this.
Well, yeah, because what Planned Parenthood and these abortion clinics make it sound like is, you have your abortion today, you go back to school and work tomorrow. It's a giant eraser. It gets rid of the problem. But what it does is it creates so many other problems.
Well, and Teresa Tomeo in the introduction says you can't practice, well, it's a quote, you can't practice vice virtuously. Slowly but surely the truth about abortion is being revealed.
That's right.
We even saw that recently with the whole Gosnell
thing. Gosnell thing.
But they don't want to look.
That's right. I mean, it took really a tweet fest with Gosnell from Brian Kemper, who's part of our youth outreach. A whole bunch of kids got together and did a tweet fest, and that's finally what got the secular media to finally pay attention.
Now, were you really pro-life growing up because you saw chickens hatch?
Oh, you're talking about when I was a teacher, yeah.
Right.
Well, I was a first grade teacher when that happened, and basically I was teaching in a public school in New York, and most of my school, my colleagues were pro-choice. They would identify themselves, and Denise, my colleague, was adamantly pro-choice. And one day the chick eggs, we say in the book, I came in and one egg was starting to crack and open up prematurely, and you saw the pulsing of that little heart, and of course the chick was dying in front of us, and she was getting so fretful and upset, and I was too. But I said, well, Debbie, Denise, how can you get so upset about that? It's a chicken. When you say it's okay for a woman to have an abortion, and she goes, well, I never thought of it like that. I said, well, sometimes, why are you so pro-life with an animal, but not with a person?
Right. In fact, you talk about a woman's right to choose. What is it really that they're talking about? But with puppies, there's almost a unanimous pro-life opinion. Right. You talk about the idea of getting rid of dogs or puppies and how there would be this big uproar.
Well, sure. What I compare is that you have two dogs. You have a thoroughbred Labrador who's pregnant with 6 pups, and another owner with a mutt who has 6 pups. And then if you say, well, the Labrador, well, he's going to make a lot of money on those dogs, but the guy who's got those 6 mutts, he's going to have a hard time finding homes. So why not abort the 6 mutts? Right. Don't we have enough homeless dogs walking around the streets? But if you did that with dogs, everybody would be in an uproar. Right. But with people, children, they say, oh, it's okay to have the abortion because I can't afford to have the child right now. So it's the same argument, but it's okay not to abort dogs, but it's okay to abort people.
Right.
So, sometimes you have to use basic logic with people to get them to say, aha, get an aha moment in their minds.
Well, a lot of cases, they haven't thought about it very much at all.
Exactly.
In fact, it's a settled issue in their mind.
Right.
And in fact, they get annoyed if you bring it up because there's a bit of guilt in the back of the mind, especially if you've been raised Catholic. It's always there.
Right.
That underpinning. Now, you had a tubal ligation.
Right.
Why'd you have that?
Well, basically, I had been taking the birth control pill, and then when I wanted to have children, stopped and got pregnant right away, and then went back on the pill, and then had my twins, and then at that point, the doctor was telling me that really taking the pill would not be good because of a stroke history in my family. And so the tension there, not practicing NFP or even knowing of NFP, of not having birth control now and fearful of having another set of twins so close, I felt, what am I going to do? And it was a Catholic OBGYN, believe it or not, who recommended a tubal ligation. I had it in the 80s, and that was a very big thing in the 80s, the tubal ligations. Right. And I had it, and because I felt I had my family and this was it. And it wasn't until years later when I came back to the church that I realized it was wrong, and that I also deeply regretted aborting God's will, because really what I was doing is taking control. It was what I thought, and that's what this is all about. When you think about abortion, contraception, we want to take control of the situation instead of trusting in God.
Right. Now, you went to Epcot Center and you saw something, Wonder of Life exhibit, and that impacted you.
It did, because I had never really thought about or watched or really thought about the whole 9 months of pregnancy. And when you go to that exhibit, you see it, first up and close, and especially from the very first moments of conception. And it just hit me. I took the pill, and it was like a rush came over me of grief that I did this. I could have aborted life. Because they make you seem like if you take the pill, you're stopping conception, but what you're not doing.
Like it's a prophylactic or something.
Right. But what's really happening is you're stopping implantation. And when I got that whole awareness and then saw that exhibit, it was really very disturbing for me. And
that's why you say you feel like you might have destroyed an unknown number of children.
Exactly. And since I came public about that and wrote my testimony about the contraception and everything, I've had women come up to me at talks and tell me they feel the same way with tears in their eyes. And more and more of these women are going like on Rachel's Vineyard retreats. We hear from the retreat teams that more and more women who used contraceptives or did tubal ligations and things, aborted God's will like this, are going through a Rachel's Vineyard retreat because they feel they need healing also. And so they should.
What was that phrase used? Aborting God's will or aborted God's will?
Yeah, aborting God's will.
Okay, I hadn't heard that before. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's what you're really doing.
Right. No. And another thing you point out, it is legal to have an abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy, even for healthy babies and healthy moms. But a lot of people don't realize that's
They don't
true.
realize that. Like you said before, Doug, abortion's settled law. Well, first of all, it's not a law. It's a Supreme Court decision, and that's what I review for everyone in the book. You know, and that there were 2 Supreme Court decisions on January 20th. Roe and Doe. That's right. And so there's just so much information about the abortion industry, how it got started. You know, in the book, I even trace the startings with Dr. Nathanson and how they lied about the back alley abortions.
The number of deaths from how many we're having and how many people were dying.
They just totally made up all the figures. And so I think for people to really know this issue and to try to say, where do I really stand, go back and see how it got started. And I also talk about the authentic feminism of the turn of the last century, and then I bring us up.
And they were not in favor of abortion.
They were not in favor of abortion.
And even Margaret Sanger technically wasn't in favor of abortion until the mid-30s or something like that.
Right. She originally started out, her thing was the Birth Control League. I mean, she was into birth control. And it wasn't until many years later that abortion crept into the Planned Parenthoods. They were first founded by Margaret Sanger as birth control.
Okay. Now, you also talk about, let's compare abortion to other ambulatory surgeries, and then you compare it to a gallbladder.
Right.
And why'd you do that?
Well, you know, I've known relatives who have gone in for gallbladder surgery, so I just picked that one. But it would apply to any ambulatory surgery. All right, so think about it. I don't know if you've had ambulatory surgery, but I have. And what happens is, first of all, you go to your doctor, because whatever the problem is, and you have consultation and tests, right? And then he sets up your surgery. He describes to you exactly what he's going to do. Even sometimes draws diagrams on a pad and shows you what he's going to do. And then what happens? A couple of days before your date to go in for that ambulatory in and out the same day surgery, you go to the hospital, don't you? And you have blood work, chest x-ray, urine analysis. You meet with an anesthesiologist who tells you what he's going to do to you and all that. Then the day of the surgery, they repeat all that stuff. You sign all kinds of forms. The doctor will again explain what he's going to do. And sometimes, like I know when I had my torn meniscus done, they put a mark on your actual knee and show you, here's where we're going to operate. You know, and then after the surgery, the doctor comes and talks to you. You're in recovery, and you're there for several hours, right? And then a family member has to take you home. You're wheeled out in a wheelchair to the car, all this, and then you're given a prescription, usually of pain meds and antibiotics, and you have to go see the doctor in probably another week. Does that happen with an abortion? Absolutely not. And what I do in the book is I pick item by item to item, like I just did. This is normal surgery, and this is what happens in abortion. You know, they come in, they have to pay cash, credit card, or Medicaid, or insurance. Then they go into another room, they undress, they get a sedative, and then boom, next thing you know, they're on the procedure table. And the first time they meet the doctor is when they're on the procedure table. When he walks into the room. And they never see him again unless they come back for another abortion. Now, how is this good medicine for women? You know?
Right, I mean, you talk about it, and this, or at least one of the women, because you have, there's a plethora of testimonies throughout the book about the sitting in the, you know, coming into the recovery, quote unquote, recovery room, the waiting room, with all the blank faces.
That's right. And they're sitting in recliner chairs, which, by the way, I saw in the courtroom for Gosnell, the disgusting recliner, that one of the ones from his clinic that he put these women in. And when you look at the testimonies of the women, how many of them said, they walked me down the hall from the procedure room into a room full of recliners with women sitting there. Right.
Now, one of the, Phyllis in Ohio, writing of her abortion, I thought this was interesting. The nurse who promised she would hold my hand was very warm and kind until they turned on the suction. Then her hand went limp like she did not want to touch me.
Well, because, you know, these nurses, you know, you think, like, how can they do this? It does affect them. And we know this from the people who've come out of the abortion industry. As you know, I have an interview there from Dr. Tony Levatino, which a lot of people are familiar with. It affects them. You know, that you just can't stand and watch this happening, I think, day in and day out.
So they have to disconnect themselves.
They have to. They have to, because otherwise you just can't, you know, even the doctors themselves have to disconnect from what they're doing.
And you talk about, was it Ms. Sandoval, who was working at, I guess, at a Planned Parenthood. Talking about her minimal training consisted of a very stern admonishment to never call it a baby.
Call it an it.
Yeah, never call it he or she.
Right.
Tell the women she had an abortion herself and that she had come out okay.
Right, yeah. Well, because her job was to sell an abortion. And that's why they said, never say it's a baby, never say it's a girl or a boy, say it's an it. And she, with no medical training, her job was to be in this other room next to the procedure room. They would take the collection bag from the suction abortion, and she had to put it in a large petri dish and identify all the baby parts. And she didn't last there too long before she left. And her life spiraled really out of control until she hit rock bottom. And then she actually went back to her mom and asked for help. And she went to Rachel's Vineyard and gave me her testimony for the book.
Now, you talk about when abortion became legal, many Americans began to see it in a different light. Many women I've spoken to during my decades of pro-life work have told me they would never have considered an abortion if it was still illegal. Then you kind of point out how many people would abide by speed limits if they were just a suggestion. In fact, most people don't as it is. But,
that's right. But it's the threat of enforcement, really.
Right, that's what it is, exactly.
It's the threat of enforcement.
What's the likelihood that there's going to be negative consequences to the situation, right?
Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned earlier about the late Dr. Nathanson, and he talked about we simply fabricated results of fictional polls, and we said the actual figure was approaching 100,000. The figure we gave to the media was 1 million. Right. That there was 10,000 people dying when it was really more like 200 or 250. Now, that's what people said back then. And if you bring it up today, say, well, one death is too many, right?
That's right.
That's what their answer is, right?
But meanwhile, in the Gosnell case, Doug, right, there was one death. Well, if that was too many, how come? Where was the outrage from Planned Parenthood? Where was the outrage from the National Organization for Women in NARO? Where was the outrage?
Right.
You don't hear it. Abortion is the sacred cow. And they can't say anything negative about it, no matter what.
Well, years ago I saw a debate, and Faye Waddleton was on television, and the line was supposedly, if men could have children, abortion would be a sacrament. Well, she was right about one thing. It is a sacrament, but it's theirs.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, Father Pavone has written about this, many articles, that there are groups out there like there's a Protestant group where they actually treat abortion like a sacrament. It's terrible.
Now, you say here in Chapter 6, well, I had an abortion and it was fabulous. Statistics show that 1 in 10 American women will have an abortion by age 20, 1 in 4 by age 30, and 1 in 3 by age 45. And you also talk about the problem, as one of the doctors talked about who had done a lot of abortions, the problem with sterility, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, very often, because of the complications done to women through an abortion, it's the only child they were ever able to conceive because of damage done to them during that abortion. Planned Parenthood makes it sound like, oh, you can always have a child, have your abortion today, go back to work and school, you're not ready yet. Right. Oh, in a few years now, then you can. And very often, they've had to have hysterectomies because of complications from their abortion. And they never have the child that they really want later on. And
also, you point out, I know elsewhere in the book, about the idea of waiting longer, people getting married later.
That's right.
Waiting longer, women getting into their 30s. And, everybody's been told, oh, there's no problem with you having a child, even up to 40 years old. What they don't tell you is, well, there's no problem having it, but the statistical analysis would tell you it's harder.
It's more difficult to become pregnant.
Right.
Your women's most fertile years really, are in your from 18 to probably 28 is like prime time. And so now for women who are first getting married into their 30s, and then of course they can't have children right away because we have to have the perfect house and everything furnished, 2 cars. It's all this materialistic stuff.
Well, it's also, you're right. In a lot of ways, a lot of us expect to start where our parents ended.
Right, yeah. And so they want to have everything in place and then say, okay, now we're going to have a child. And bingo, they don't become pregnant, and then time goes by, and very often, and I bring this out in the book, they resort to IVF. And which again leads...
Which is what?
That's, where they artificially,
in vitro fertilization,
create the child. And of course, the Catholic Church is totally against this practice, as we know. And that's the other thing, Doug. There are so many Catholics out there that are practicing IVF. It's sad. But what I bring out in the book is that medical science has now done something even terrible. They recommend what they call selective reduction.
Right, you talk about it in the book here.
Yes, because what they'll do is, let's say they'll implant 6 embryos that have been created in petri dishes into the woman, because they know there's a good chance that many of them may not take. These procedures, Doug, personal cost between $10,000 and $15,000 per time that they're going to implant, and sometimes there's no children implanted that stay. But if they do and conceive too many children are there, then the doctor says, well, we can do a selective reduction, and they do this around 14 to 16 weeks of pregnancy. Isn't that terrible? Right. And then you might say, well, how do they decide? Well, sometimes it's by sex, if they want a boy or a girl, whatever. Sometimes it's whichever baby they can get easiest, and sometimes there'll be triplets and they'll reduce it to a singleton, and this is horrific. This is how far we've gotten by going down this road. It's terrible. You know?
Right.
And of course, I have stories in there too about there was a father who his wife, they went through IVF and they conceived twins, and she did not want to, and he was begging her not to selectively reduce, and she says, well, either we get rid of one, or I'll get rid of the whole pregnancy. And he talked about his grief of, save one or save none. What am I to do? So he acquiesced, but it still haunted him. You know,
the Hobson's choice, so to speak.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Neither one is good. In Chapter 7, and this is something we hear about. I'm against abortion, but what about cases of rape and incest? And you talk about, no, abortion does not cure rape. It does not avenge the crime. It's an evil unto itself and serves only to the end of life of the child. And also what's important, and you point out here, is what percentage, on one level, there's not a high percentage that has to do with rape, but it gets thrown out. On the other side, though, how they don't ask how this young girl got pregnant and how much of this could be abuse at home with a relative or someone who's certainly over the age of 18 or 21.
Well, very often in these cases, especially with incest, that's what it does. It hides the crime. The criminal goes free, and the young girl has to endure an abortion. And I have there testimonies of women, some who were raped and aborted, and some who were raped and either brought the child up themselves or placed the child for adoption. And all the women who aborted regretted it, and the ones who had the baby did not regret having the child. And also, too, they undid that fallacy of saying, no, the child does not remind me of the rapist. It was a healing thing. I love this child.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we are just about out of time. What's next for the new author here?
Well, I don't know, Doug. Right now I'm just enjoying getting this book out there. And I wanted to let people know that I wrote this book for the conflicted middle, and also too for pro-lifers, to give you some good arguments to work with the people, because we all know people who are still clinging to choice, and good Catholics too. And I want them to use this book for conversion. That's my
It's
goal.
highly readable, and it's very powerful, those testimonies. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Doug.
Great to have you here. Always
Thank you.
Great to see you, Janet. Janet Morana, author of Recall Abortion by St. Benedict Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. You should check it out. Check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.